Edition of Things That Go Bump in the Night with Isabel Evelyn
and Felicity McKee, and we're actually going live, hopefully, on YouTube right now. Hopefully.
I mean, my camera has its little blue light on.
Yeah, to be honest,
just technology hates us on this show, clearly.
Yeah, so like our preview of the live stream on YouTube is quite literally our logo. And it's because there's a delay. It's showing us now.
Hello.
We're there, so if you're following us on YouTube, you can definitely see us now. Yay! And you can hear us, unlike last week.
Yes.
Yes.
You can hear us for the first time. My stepdad and my mum watched the live stream last week, and they were like, yeah, it was a bit weird.
Yeah, you can tell on the live stream it's just me looking very confused for most of it. It's like, why is the technology not working?
Normally that's me over this side of the table, but the technology's been really nice to me today. Everything's done what it's needed to do.
Yeah, it's just been here that's been the issue.
This room is the technology, it's like there's a demon who just hates technology in this room.
Which fits the theme of the show, to be honest,
yes.
Generally, when we're looking at all things ghoulish and murderish and kind of culty. But today, you have been doing a little bit of investigating, I think, on this, but mostly it was me. But we were having a quick Google there before the start of the show to show you some of the images of the creations. This particular killer that we're going to feature tonight inspired Psycho's Norman Bates, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and apparently Bloody Face in American Horror Story Asylum.
Nice. I've never seen American Horror Story, so I can't really say much about that one. But the other two were pretty terrifying on video. Not in real life, so I can't imagine a real life Norman Bates knocking at your door being like, hello. That would be quite scary.
Yeah, and also Silence of the Lambs. So if you think of Anthony Hopkins in that with Father Beans, Sweet Chianti, that is also partly inspired by our killer today. So our killer is Ed Gein. So he was doing his killing in the 1950s, and
the 1950s, the good old days of being stuffed into a barrel, dumped in a pond at the back of your house, and the police calling it an accidental drowning.
You really are hung up on that case.
I'm so hung up on it, but I think it is a great example of why all this happened in the 1950s, because the police are so terrible at actually capturing anyone.
Yeah. So these crimes were considered so heinous that they actually shocked America. So if you think of like the American dream, and then in between the American dream, you've got body snatching and murder and the creation of gruesome items from victims' bodies. So for example, he made a belt out of nipples.
Honestly, I feel like that's quite a stylish accessory. I don't know, I feel like if you had like plastic nipples, that would be kind of funny. That's the kind of thing you'd find like in a funky vintage shop, like plastic nipple belt.
I'd be querying if it was in the vintage store, to be honest.
Real nipple belt isn't ideal.
But basically, because Ed had been able to commit these crimes in plain sight, it really shocked America. You know, it was kind of a rural area, the sort of area where, you know, neighbours help neighbours and things like that. And beneath the surface...
It's the kind of area where people always keep their doors unlocked because there's no crime that happens here.
Yeah, that kind of a thing. And so this really, really, really shocked America, and it kind of became a bit of a media storm and everybody was kind of interested. But I think that's generally what brings people into murder sort of stories. We're all just kind of curious about it. But Edward Gein was born Edward Theodore Gein. So he was born in 1906. And at the time, it was part of a small farming community of Plainfield, Wisconsin. And he was really, really bullied as a child because he had a slight growth over one of his eyes. And according to others, he was a bit effeminate. So there was a lot of bullying around this because he didn't meet the sort of stereotypical expectation of you know, rugged male in this area.
Ah yes, the toxic masculinity of the 1950s, building serial killers all across the world.
So this was what was happening in sort of his school life. And then when he got home, he didn't escape that because his father was an alcoholic. So his father was called George, and he verbally abused the family and was just generally not a nice person. But the mother also didn't help the situation. She was quite religious, and she would constantly go at him for not being able to get a job. So they had moved to a 155-acre farm after selling a grocery shop in the city. And since doing that, he had struggled to find work as a carpenter, even as a tanner, or as an insurance salesman. And the carpentry and the tanning skills will come in later in relation to some of his creations. But his mother, I think the mother probably played a really large part in sort of who he became.
It's always slightly Oedipal with cases like this. And that's definitely a big influence on how, definitely their mothers are a big influence on how they behave and the kind of people they become in later life.
Yeah, well, she was very religious, and she was Lutheran, so she enforced these teachings on the household, and so she would berate him every day, and she would tend to quote biblical verses at him about death and retribution. And she invoked a really strong fear about sexuality and drinking in him, because obviously the father was an alcoholic, and I think she then leaned further into her religion as a part to basically deal with that. But interestingly, she taught her son that basically all women were inherently evil.
That's weird. That's very weird.
Coming from a woman.
I don't like that. Also, just a quick side note, if I seem really quiet, it's because I have a cold, so I keep turning my mic up, but no matter how much I turn it up, my voice still isn't very loud.
So basically, Ed wasn't able to bring people home, he couldn't really have friendships, and so he grew up very alone, isolated, and with a really kind of twisted idea of what the world was.
Don't isolate people, it's how they decide to murder you.
So in 1940, his father George, the man who was the alcoholic, died, and he was 66, and basically his heart just quit. And so Ed had a brother, so there was two boys, and they began sort of doing odd jobs around to help support the farm, and the neighbours actually considered them to be really handy people to have, you know, really good handymen. If you needed something done, they could do it. And also, Ed did babysitting.
Why is it always like this? Like, until it comes out that they've killed a bunch of people, it's just, oh yeah, that's just Ed from down the road. He's lovely. Sometimes he looks after the kids, you know. He's just such a sweet guy.
So good with his hands, can make absolutely anything.
And then it's just like, yes, he was very talented in his hands and creating things. He made this lamp of some human flesh.
Yeah, so his brother Henry at this point began dating a divorced mother of two, and he was thinking about moving in with her. He actually started to speak really badly about their mother, because their mother was really abusive, and their mother really depended kind of on having them about. And so his brother Henry was trying to pull him away from Augusta, the mother. But this ended up driving a wedge between the two brothers, so she kind of got her claws in even deeper. And Ed's basically a mummy's boy, is the best way of putting it. He's very much his mum's fan.
This is just making me think, it's that third one in the Silence of the Lambs series.
It really is. There are photographs on the internet.
I see now. I understand.
So in the midst of all this, so there's this sort of ongoing feud between the brothers, Henry died, and it's seemingly a tragedy, but some people actually think that Henry might have been murdered by Ed.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so here's what happened. So it's 1945. There's a brush fire on their property, so this is just outside Plainfield, and they're trying to keep it, you know, like put it out, and it gets out of control. They call in the fire brigade, and when the flames go down, Ed claims that his brother has gone missing. The brother is soon found dead from asphyxiation. the coroner doesn't really say that anything suspicious is found on the body when they do an autopsy, but he did say that, he later said that Henry had a head trauma that could suggest foul play. So it wasn't just asphyxiation, he had a head injury.
I mean, there's part of me that's like, Ed could have just whacked him over the head and gone, okay, now he's like knocked out and I'll just leave him here to asphyxiate. Or he could have knocked him over the head and strangled him, although if there's no suggestion of strangulation or maybe suffocated in some way. But I mean, a fire is a very handy thing. Just, here, I'm going to knock this person out and put them near the fire and then they'll die. Brilliant.
Yeah, because obviously, you know, if you're near smoke and you inhale enough smoke, you will asphyxiate. So it's kind of like hands-free murder?
Yeah, it's like murder on the go. Because you can just leave them.
Yeah, it may have just been like an opportunistic killing.
Yeah.
But nobody's really quite sure, so that one's a wee bit up in the air. But following the death of Henry, Augusta, who was ridiculously dependent on Ed, ended up having a stroke. And so this left her really quite immobile. So she depended even further.
It's Red Dragon. This is Red Dragon in real life.
Yeah, this has inspired a lot of horror movies and stories that we know.
I mean, I love the Silence of the Lambs series. It is my favourite horror film series ever. I'd watch it again and again and again and again. But the more you go into detail about this case, I'm just like, I've watched this case in a film. I've watched this happen.
Yeah, so she's pretty immobile now because of the stroke. She remains pretty much as fanatical in her religion, so she's very zealous about it. One local story tells how she witnessed a man kill a dog, but focused on the fact that he invited an unmarried woman into his house. So he had killed a dog, but like when approached about it, she was all like, "Well, brought in an unmarried woman into his house. How could he?" It wasn't about the dog. It was about different actions. The killing of the dog was not the issue.
Yeah, you know when someone doesn't care about killing the dog, they're not a good person.
Yeah.
You've got to care about them doggos.
So she actually then passed away in 1945 as well, and she was 67. So this basically left Ed very alone and isolated, so without friends and family, because obviously growing up he had been bullied, she hadn't let him have friends around, he was very isolated.
It's alone time.
Yeah. So he ended up holding on to their farm, but he boarded up the rooms that his mother had used, including the drawing room and the entire upstairs. So there was just large sections that couldn't use. And he became a bit of a recluse.
That is quite weird that he just goes, okay, I can't use or leave this anymore.
Yeah,
That's
so
fine.
So he basically lived out of a single room and the kitchen. And they got more and more run down over time because he just wasn't doing any of the upkeep, even though he's a handyman.
I mean, I guess he was focused on some other things.
Yeah, so he only really ever left the house to do the occasional bit of road crew stuff, or you know, a bit of crop threshing, so just like the odd job here and there. He sold his brother's land and began to rely upon a farm subsidy in 1951, and this is where I think a lot of the inspiration for some of the serial killer stuff comes from. At the same time as doing all of this, he had some very interesting hobbies, really serial killer style hobbies.
Okay, elaborate.
He liked books about cannibals, about Nazi war crimes and atrocities. He also became really interested in human anatomy, and he started digging up recently buried women who resembled his mother, dissecting them, tanning skin, and then using that to experiment with taxidermy.
So he basically was so upset about not having his mum, he was like, I'm going to make another mother.
Kind of.
You know, if that wasn't weird and creepy, I'd almost feel bad for him. But it's weird and creepy, so I don't.
Yeah, so like he's really dependent on her. And
also like a massive violation of these people's dead bodies. Like, their family probably were quite upset that, oh no, my dead relative's been dug up.
Yeah, so like a lot of this, what he did was digging up with dead bodies. We haven't even got to the killings part. Yes, he's basically got all the red flags.
I mean, as we discussed previously with the Burke and Hare case, body snatching is only a small step away from murder, really. Yeah. A lot of them just go, you know what, I could dig up a freshly buried body, but that's a lot of effort. There's one right here that I can kill.
Which unfortunately happens more often than not in these cases. So basically he's doing sort of the digging up of bodies, and eventually he decides, I need a fresh body. And
yeah,
so
they're already a bit mouldy by the time they've been around for a bit.
And so in 1957...
That sounds really serial killer of me. I'm not, trust me, I'm not. I was just trying to be funny.
In 1957, Bernice Warden, she's the owner of Plainfield's hardware store, disappears. Her truck had been driven out of town about 9:30, and after the store remained closed all day, her son, who is interestingly the deputy sheriff, Frank Warden, entered around 5 to find that the register open with blood on the floor and a lone receipt for antifreeze on the counter. Recalling that Ed Gein had said he'd stopped by to buy antifreeze the night before, Warden pointed out the connection, and Gein was arrested that same evening. So, you know, Gein is a killer, but it's more, I think, about what he did with the bodies, and even with the bodies that he dug up, which is of the real interest here. So upon searching his family's farm, the authorities found much more than they had bargained for. So they found Bernice, and she had been decapitated and was hanging upside down from her wrists in the shed. Body hanging upside down. She'd been shot with a .22 caliber rifle and dressed out like an animal, so her head had been stuffed into a burlap sack and her heart was sitting in front of a stove. So basically he's sort of taken her all apart.
Yeah.
When the police then investigated further around the house, they found more remains, and they found that of a missing woman who was a tavern over, Mary Hogan, and she had disappeared in 1954. So it was really only when, you know, the woman who owned the hardware store disappeared.
Only when the woman whose son is the deputy sheriff disappears that actually anything happens.
Yeah. So Mary had unfortunately been cut into pieces as well. Her face had been tanned as a mask, and it was in a paper bag, and her skull was hidden away in a box. So like it is kind of the place of nightmares. So this isn't the end. Like, this is not where the gore stops. He had skulls mounted atop of his bedposts. He had turned some of them into bowls. Skin had been used to create a wastebasket and chair coverings. Gein had also fashioned clothing from the dead as well. So like, imagine having like a leather jacket, quite literally leather. They found a shoulder to waist corset made for a woman's tanned torso, along with multiple face masks and leggings crafted from human leg skin. Prepare yourself for this. You're going to cross your legs. He had stored 9 vulva in a shoebox, including 2 from teenagers, and he kept a box of noses, a belt of nipples, a face lampshade, and a window shade drawstring made from a pair of lips. All told, the remains of about 15 women's bodies were found in his house in various pieces and forms.
The vulva one was very upsetting just then.
Yeah.
That was really upsetting. But I'm just thinking, why does he have a corset? What was he expecting? Oh, if I date someone, I'm going to give them this lovely corset as a gift that I've made from the remains of other women.
There is actually an image, and I'm going to see if I can find the actual image of the corset, because there are people out there who have made like replicas of some of the stuff that he's done. So you can buy actual faux leather jackets that look like human skin. It was a fashion thing a wee while back. I think it was quite expensive to buy them.
Why? Why does anyone want that?
So if you look up the Ed,
you are, that's quite weird.
Yeah, was it? I'm looking at some of the stuff right now. I don't even know if I could send you that. It is quite something. But when
Maybe
I say
in the break, I'll wander over and go have a look at it.
So when I say she was hanging up by her wrists, if you imagine your feet are up in the air, right, and your wrists are like, so there's your 2 feet and there's an arm, right?
Yeah.
The wrists are tied up like that and the feet are kind of dangling and the head is missing.
Oh.
It's it's something else.
I mean, I guess you have to drain the blood. I need to stop saying things like this because this makes me sound like a serial killer, but I'm just like, no, I used to live in an area of France where I used to stay in an area of France where people would often like hunt wild boar and things like that. So I understand in principle how this works. But I don't think you should do it on people. I don't really like people doing it on animals. I'm a vegetarian, but
yeah,
you really shouldn't do it on people.
So
that's not nice.
None of it's nice. Gein claimed that he had basically regularly entered into this sort of hypnotic state, and during this he would visit local graveyards, and he said he had been there at least 40 times between 1947 and 1952. So he said that usually he would stop himself from grave robbing, so like he'd be there in this hypnotic state and something would stop him. But he did often return home with parts of women who he thought resembled his mother. Now, I'm really curious about this, right? They resemble his mother. That suggests he must have known them maybe in life before they died.
Or he may have seen in an obituary
a photograph in a newspaper.
And gone, oh, that looks like my mum. Time to go to the graves.
Yeah. So on the occasions where he found someone whose body closely resembled his mother, he would...
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why didn't he just take his mother's body?
I don't know.
He's
obsessed with her, but...
He's obsessed with her, but he goes, I'm not going to taxidermy her body. I'm too respectful to do that.
Well, I think she had always terrified him in life, so maybe that he's close to his mother, and this is a way of being close to his mother because he's so dependent on her, but also getting back at her for being so abusive.
Maybe. But then getting back at her for being so abusive surely would be to, taxidermy her actual body. Maybe she was cremated or something, and he's like, oh, I need to get another body now.
I don't know. I think maybe his fear of her probably
Prevented
helped
him
that.
from digging her up.
Yeah, so when he did find a person whose body was similar to his mother's, he would tan their skin to make the gruesome paraphernalia found in his house. And actually, I've seen photographs of cutlery, so he would use like the bones to be the handle of the knife and fork. So like literally knife and forks made out of bones. It's, yeah,
I mean,
it's creative, but so gruesome. Unnecessary.
Interestingly, on bone tools, I was reading this thing the other day about how leather workers often use rib bones of animals to, it's part of the process to do with like an oil, and they've been doing this since the Stone Ages, and they found that nothing works better than bone. In fact,
yeah.
If you want like a good leather, you should use bone. So interestingly, I can understand use of bone as a good tool. I do not understand use of bone as a good piece of cutlery.
I suppose it makes a handle. I mean, they look very functional in the photographs.
I mean, they probably were pretty functional, but I still think it's kind of gross.
Oh no, I mean, everything about this is gross. There's nothing about this that isn't gross.
I mean, definitely creative, but creative and horrible.
Yeah, so he confessed to having robbed 9 graves, and the authorities kind of thought that he would have needed help to do all this digging. Digging a grave up and things like that. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, grave robbers normally work in teams. Throwing back to the example of Burke and Hare, they normally work in at least pairs. And
so he had to basically then demonstrate to the police that he was actually strong enough to do all the grave robbing on his own, because they weren't sure as to whether or not there might have been someone else.
So did they take him to a grave and go, okay, dig that up?
I'm actually not sure if they took him to a grave and did it, but
how would they demonstrate
But
that?
it is definitely said that he had to demonstrate that he'd been strong enough to do it. So like it does create this image of him just digging in the ground. Just keep digging, don't believe it, nope, deeper.
No, I feel like the only way they could really test that would be to take him to a cemetery, probably somewhere he'd already been grave robbing, and go, okay, now dig. I don't. Or they would have buried a coffin themselves and then gone, okay, now dig that up.
Well, I'm having a quick look here to see if I can find
I don't
anything.
understand how you would verify that without actually having him dig something up. Be able to then open the coffin, because you've got to dig around it to be able to open it. Did he fill the graves in afterwards, or would he just leave them open? Because that's even more work. Because then they would have to verify that he could do that as well.
Well, the thing is, he technically did it. He did it sort of soon after the funeral, so they're still relatively fresh. So there's less work involved in the digging to get the bodies out.
Okay, now I definitely think they would have had to bury something. Go, okay, now dig that up.
Yeah. So I found a bit of information. Basically, the State Crime Laboratory participated in opening 3 test graves identified by Gein. The caskets inside were wooden boxes. The top boards ran crossways, not lengthwise. The tops of the boxes were about 2 feet, 60 centimetres below the surface in sandy soil. Gein had robbed the graves soon after the funerals, so obviously they haven't completed the graves. The test graves were exhumed because authorities were uncertain as to whether the slight Gein, because he was quite scrawny, was capable of single-handedly digging up a grave during a single evening. They were found as Gein described. 2 of the exhumed graves were found empty. 1 had a crowbar in place of a body. 1 casket was empty. 1 casket Gein had filled open when he lost his pry bar, and most of the body had gone from the 3rd grave, yet Gein had returned rings and some body parts, thus apparently corroborating his actual confession. So basically he said, I did that grave, this and this, and they dug them up, and obviously it doesn't necessarily show, but basically they did think it was a bit strange because he is quite a thin figure.
See, I still think it would have been more entertaining for them to sorry, just had to cough that, for them to have got an empty box, dug a grave, put the box in, filled in the grave, and then gone, okay, now dig that up.
Yeah. Well, they're test graves.
Knowing 1950s police as well as I do from going through all of these cases, I just feel like that's something they would have done.
I don't know. Doing test runs? I mean, they definitely did sort of dig up and explore some of the test graves.
They do some weird things in those days to investigate. I mean, we've come across a few weird and strange investigations.
Yeah.
So there's part of me that goes, yeah, that's definitely something they do.
So his neighbours obviously struggled to try and understand who, the guy who'd done babysitting and odd jobs being this killer.
Imagine if one's babies had gone missing. Jesus Christ, that would be even more problematic.
Well, the thing is, the horror apparently was really overwhelming for people, and one teenager apparently had seen some of the masks, the skin masks in his house, and had actually asked about them, and Ed had told him that they were relics from the Philippines that a cousin had sent him during World War II.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so other murders suddenly seemed to be connected to the murders that he was known to have done, such as Evelyn Hartley in 1953. And he ended up being highlighted on Life and Time covers, and basically it was absolutely covered everywhere. But what's really interesting is Ed apparently admitted that he realised he wanted to become a woman after his mother had died.
This is Silence of the Lambs.
It really is.
It's a combination. It's the backstory of Red Dragon with the murderer from Silence of the Lambs. That's what they've done. I see it now. I understand.
I think you're going to like this next bit, if only just because I think you'll be like typical kind of cops of the time.
Leave it on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, we can do a temporary break and then come back and do the.
I need to have a proper cough, and I don't.
Yeah, we'll do a break and then we'll come back to this, and we'll pick up where Ed is fascinated and wants to become a woman.
Okay, we have some tunes. Please enjoy, and we'll see you after the break. Hello and welcome back to Things That Go Bump in the Night with Isabel, Evelyn and
Felicity McKee.
And today we are talking about
Ed Gein. Is it Gein or Gein? I've heard Gein a lot of the time, but when I look at it, I wonder.
I keep saying Gain, which I know
Isn't
isn't it?
Gein, I think, is
Gein.
the correct way of saying it. But where we left off was basically that Gein had basically admitted that he apparently wanted to become a woman after his mother died. Now, some people say this, and some people say that he actually, that wasn't it, but that basically he was creating a woman suit so that he become his mother, because he literally wanted to crawl into her skin.
He
To be
wanted
her.
to crawl back up into the womb.
Yeah. So he denied having sex with the bodies, claiming that they smelled too bad.
I reckon he did. This all feels a little Oedipal to me, and if they look like his mum, I reckon they did. Also, the 9 preserved vulvas, what's that about?
It's messy, right? So some people say he made the woman suit because he wanted to be a woman, and some say because he obviously wanted to, like, he was very close to his mother and maybe he wanted to, like, crawl into the skin of her. But this is sort of the bit where you talk about, like, interesting things that 1950s police did.
Oh yes, I
Yes.
love a good 1950s police story.
So he ended up being questioned by Sheriff Art Schley, Schley, so Schley?
This is Clyde.
Yeah, okay. Sheriff Art. That's all we. Sheriff Art.
Sheriff Art, that's his new name, which we
Yeah.
call him today.
So during the questioning, he basically smashed the head and face of Gein into a wall.
See, that's not how you. I mean, Dark Knight quote: "The victim gets all fuzzy."
Yeah.
Yeah, not the victim. The whatever he said. Fuzzy.
Yeah.
That's not how you interrogate someone. There are better ways.
So the sheriff claimed it was because he was so traumatized by the nature of Ed's crimes, and it then meant that Ed's confession to the murders was inadmissible in court. And so basically this happened, and obviously the sheriff is devastated, and the sheriff ended up dying of heart failure in 1968 before Ed could go to trial. And
Nice.
many who knew the sheriff said that he'd been so traumatized by the horror of Gein's crimes that this, along with having to testify about assaulting Ed, had caused his death. And they said that he was a victim of Ed Gein as surely as if he had butchered him.
I mean, no, but also I understand where you're coming from, but also no.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
He did not do proper police work, and that is why Ed couldn't have his confession be admissible. It's your own fault, mate.
Yeah, so basically then Gein was arraigned on one count of first-degree murder in Washington County Court, and he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He ended up being diagnosed with schizophrenia and was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial. So he's unfit to stand trial and sent to Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, which is now Dodge Correctional Institution, which I've heard a lot of, like, you know, like Law and Order and stuff like that. Occasionally you might hear like, oh, they went to Dodge, or I don't know. It's a very American thing I've seen in TV shows. So he ended up in Dodge, basically, and this is a maximum security facility in Wisconsin, and then eventually got transferred to Mendota State Hospital. So he's going around a wee bit. So in 1968, they said that he was mentally able to confer with counsel and participate in defence. And so the trial begins. And obviously at this point, it's 1957 when they basically say, we're going to put you in jail, but they can't actually do the court case until 1968.
So it's, here, have 11 years in jail, and then we'll do the court case.
Well, in hospital, technically.
Yeah, technically, but I would argue that it's probably more like a prison than a hospital, judging on accounts from those time periods.
Yeah. The trial only lasted 1 week, which I thought was a bit surprising. I thought it would have lasted a bit longer.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence they've got to get through. A lot of lampshades.
That's awful.
It's awful, but you laughed.
Yeah. A psychiatrist testified that Gein had said that he didn't know whether he had killed Bernice Worden, as in whether or not it was intentional or accidental. He said that he had examined a gun in Warden's store and that the gun had gone off. He also said that he was trying to load a bullet into a rifle when it discharged.
I think that actually maybe, sir, you did kill her because, you know...
The body was in your house.
And you killed you killed at least one other person before that, so... Sir, I think you did do it. Thank you. That is my evidence to the court.
Yeah. So he then said that he hadn't aimed the rifle at her and he didn't remember anything else that happened that morning. His defence team requested that his trial be held without a jury, and the judge at the time agreed to this. He was found guilty on November the 14th of 1968, and a second trial was then dealt with the issues of his sanity, because the doctors testified for the prosecution and the defence, and so this kind of was like, was he not, we don't know.
Okay.
And the judge said that he wasn't guilty by reason of insanity, and he was not guilty by reason of insanity, and ordered him to go basically back to hospital, but this time the hospital for the criminally insane. So he spent most of the rest of his life in the mental hospital, and the judge, who was called Judge Gulmore, wrote, due to the prohibitive costs, Gein was tried for only one murder, that of Mrs. Worden. He also admitted to killing Mary Hogan. So justice happened, but not like officially on paper for some people.
Really. And I think,
because like due to costs, that's a strange reason.
I'm gonna be honest. I think there was probably more as well.
There may have been, potentially his brother may have been killed by him. These are all things.
There's probably even more than that. There's probably more that we just don't know about.
Yeah.
It's like Ted Bundy, where we just don't know.
So, his house and property, obviously, he's now in hospital, and there were concerns that it would become a bit of a tourist attraction. They did appraise the property for selling, and they also auctioned off his anything that he owned.
Did this include the skin goods or not?
I think they were basically taken into evidence.
Okay.
But I'm sure if you wanted, there's probably a way of access. I mean, there's all these people who collect really strange and weird things. There's probably...
I think I've watched...
Probably a market.
I watched a documentary where this guy goes to a museum and there was definitely like a human skin lamp. Whether that's an Ed original or not is more to the question. But it was like this museum of weird and wonderful things that he's gone to, and he's like wandering around and talking about it. But okay.
Yeah, so his house ended up actually going up in flames. So a deputy fire marshal reported that a rubbish fire had been set 75 feet away from the house by a cleaning crew who were basically getting rid of some rubbish. And they said that hot coals were recovered from the spot of the bonfire, and the location of this fire didn't like travel in a line towards the house. There was no way it should have theoretically connected to the house. But I imagine
the flame did a magical jump.
Well, I suppose flickers of fire could possibly travel, but I mean, 75 feet is quite a distance.
Someone just went, I want to set fire to this house. This seems like a convenient time to do it.
Well, the house went up in flames. Arson was suspected, but they never actually determined the cause. And they went and they told Ed, and Ed simply said, just as well. Wasn't fussed.
Did not give a singular, I mean, I can't say the word I want to say because it's not after the watershed.
So we were talking then about his property getting sold. So he had a 1949 Ford sedan, and he actually used it to haul the bodies of his victims
Oh, I bet
about.
there's some weirdo who really wanted that.
Haha, here we go. Well, it was sold at public auction, and it went for $760 at the time, which is $6,700 today,
That's a decent amount.
to a carnival sideshow operator called Bonnie Gibbons.
Ah, I see.
Gibbons.
I see what this is going to be used for.
Gibbons then charged carnival goers 25 cents to see the vehicle.
Did he let them sit in it?
I imagine he probably did.
There's got to be like a premium charge. You're allowed to sit in it, and you pay even more premium. You're allowed to be where the bodies were.
It's a strange thing. I mean, I think humans were generally fascinated by the morbid, but I don't know if like seeing the car itself would be an attraction.
Yeah, I feel like what's more of an attraction would be a chair or something. But the car is interesting, you know?
Yeah, so there's another wee bit that's interesting. So he actually ended up dying. So Ed died at 77. So he had respiratory failure second to lung cancer. And he died in 1984. His grave wasn't safe. So by this I mean he had
they wanted to make an Ed chair.
Not quite.
Oh, because I feel like that would have been like a nice full circle, you know?
Turning him into a chair?
Turning him into some furniture.
Yeah.
I feel like some weirdo out there must have gone, the student will become the master in this way. There's part of me that really believes that.
So basically he had a gravestone, and people would come along to visit and would chip away pieces of the gravestone as a souvenir. Yeah, and the stone then eventually got stolen in 2000. Someone took the entire gravestone.
I mean, you know, did they replace it?
Well, they actually recovered it, so the police found it in 2001, so it was gone for about a year. It was found near Seattle, and they then placed it in storage at the Washoe County Sheriff's Department. And so the grave at the minute is unmarked, but it's not unknown, so people know where he is, because he's buried between his parents and brother in the cemetery. So it's all a big sort of family affair with the abusive parents and the brother he may have murdered.
I guess he's happy to be near his mum.
Yeah, it's really creepy when you think of it that way. But you know,
it's a little like Heathcliff and Kathy in Wuthering Heights, only mother and son and murder.
Well, it's
and body furniture.
There's a lot there. So that's basically what happened to Ed, what happened sort of with a bit of the trial and a bit of kind of even the gravestone and the aftermath. Yeah, so if we go back a little bit, we can talk about some of the furniture that he made.
Ah, yes, my favourite part.
Yeah, so obviously the police showed up.
Do we know what ended up, is the furniture still in evidence? Did it ever get auctioned off? Do we know where the furniture is?
I think it's still in storage, because these things are counted as crimes. There's stuff that's been in storage for like 100 years that is crime stuff. I imagine if you wanted to see, because there are photographs of some of the items out there, so maybe some is in storage.
If you got enough passes and verification, you could probably go to the crime storage to see it. But I think that would involve a lot.
I am going to have a quick nosy to see if I can find anything about. If you want to know about what happened to Ed Gein's furniture, you have to be over 18 to get onto this website.
Well, we both are over 18. In fact, all three of us in this room are over 18.
Yeah, so there's a book, Edward Gein, America's Most Bizarre Murderer, that claims that some of the evidence was destroyed after the investigation. And some people apparently own a few items, so like cultoftheweird.com, Zach Baggins.
That some weirdos would have it.
Yeah, he claims to have, but the thing is, he has a cauldron, a shovel, and a pair of skis and other items that belong to Gein. So like he owns items by him, but not necessarily the skulls. I mean, obviously the house did burn down.
But I imagine they would have got the skulls and most of the furniture out of there at that point and put it in evidence storage.
So some of them seem to be in a museum as well. So there's references to a museum in California.
Yep. I feel like that's got to be the Black Dahlia Museum, because that's like the big murder museum in California that has loads of different murder stuff in it, and obviously named after the Black Dahlia murders.
Yeah, which is a case that we definitely should cover because it's really interesting. Yeah, no, like Ed Gein's house. So if you imagine like a hoarder's space, that's kind of what his house was like. So yeah, the belt was actually female human nipples, because obviously, box of noses.
That's sexist. Use some men nipples.
So the lampshade was made from the skin of a human face, fingernails from female fingers, a girl's dress, and the vulvas of 2 females judged to have been about 15 years old, 9 vulvas in a box.
The 15-year-old, that seems upsetting. Are we sure he was grave robbing at that point?
Well, I'm curious, because like if he's robbing graves of people who apparently look like his mother, that's a strange choice.
15-year-old girls is a strange choice. I think there's definitely more killing that is just going to go unsolved.
But yeah, just there's multiple strange items around the house that he's made, and like there are photographs out there, and it's just, yeah, it is the stuff of horror movies. So like obviously if you look at Leatherface with the mask, that's the mask of you know, like faux human skin in the movie obviously, but that's inspired by a mask that Ed Gein wore. So if you were to Google Ed Gein mask, you'll see an image of this, which I may even try and see if I can look it up and send you a quick one over on Facebook. Yeah, so the Ed Gein mask.
Do I want to see this?
The Ed Gein mask looks very much like Mike Myers, you know, from the movies, Michael Myers.
Mike Myers, I have an interesting fact about that. His mask was actually just a William Shatner mask painted white.
Yeah. So
which I think is brilliant that's how they went for it.
Yeah, so that there is the actual image. If you look over here.
Oh, yeah, you sent me that.
Yeah.
I do not appreciate. It has hair.
It has hair.
That's the detail. It
has hair, and I mean the photographs are out there. You can see what the belt looked like. You can see some of the skin on a sofa, and there was some really interesting like fashion items made by people that were kind of like inspired by his crimes, and I can't even think of who the artist is because I can see the images here, but for some reason this person's work is being attributed to Ed, and it isn't Ed.
I like how if you're watching the live stream you can just see me going, I'm very uncomfortable with these people making fake body art.
You know there's a musical? It's a biographical musical titled Ed Gein the Musical, premiered in January 2nd, 2010 in Wisconsin.
Why?
Why
would someone make
just
I'm gonna skin some women. Is that the song?
I haven't actually listened, but there was a musical.
What? I don't understand.
We see the thing is, once you go down the rabbit hole of like serial killers, there's people on TikTok who make TikToks for serial killers. There's people who get tattoos. There's merchandise. I'm pretty sure if you were to like look up an Ed Gein t-shirt, you'd find one.
People are obsessed with serial killers, and there's two sides of it. There's the side that I think we're on, where we find what they've done absolutely abhorrent, but we're at the same time fascinated with like sort of the psychology behind it and why they did it and things like that. And then there's the side that are like, I'm in love with him, I want to marry him, I think what he did was remarkable. And that's just the crazy people, and we don't want to be associated with them.
Yeah, so yeah, for example, I'm going to give you a quick image of this. This, I can't really show this on the thing, this is the Mummy's Boy outfit that he made.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah.
That's really
that is the skin that he wanted to wear.
That's horrible.
Yeah, you can't unsee that now, can you? It's very
No,
Silence of the
that's it.
Lambs.
Did you look at that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
gonna
very
haunt my nightmares.
yeah, very Silence of the Lambs. And it's really interesting because when you look at some of the images, you can see where they are in popular media.
I mean, as you were describing it, I was like, Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs. Literally, they just went, right, let's do this.
Yeah, basically.
We'll split it up so hopefully no one patches it together and it's fine.
Yeah. There's been lots of different films inspired by it. So there was Deranged in 1974, In the Light of the Moon in 2000. It was released as Ed Gein in 2001, Ed Gein, The Butcher of Plainfield. There was Rob Zombie Films' House of a Thousand Corpses and its sequel, The Devil's Rejects. He's also, he's inspired Leatherface, Norman Bates, Buffalo Bill, Silence of the Lambs. He inspired Dr. Oliver Thredson in American Horror Asylum. There's just lots and lots and lots of different things. I mean, there's stage plays, there's a musical, there's songs, there's people who have made songs. So he's been exploited as a transgressive art or shock rock sort of subject. So there's a song titled Dead Skin Mask by on the Slayer album, Seasons in the Abyss, Nothing to Gain, which is from Mudvayne's album LD50, and Ed Gein 1992 from the Ziggins album Rusty Never Sleeps. There's also a band called Ed Gein.
Of course there is.
Yeah, so there's a lot there.
Yes. Murder some people, dig up some bodies, and you become a pop culture icon. Don't... My immediate thought was, stop trying with YouTube these days, kids. Just make a skin suit.
Yeah.
Oh, don't do that. I'm not promoting this. I think what he did was absolutely abhorrent, and I also think that there's probably a lot of a lot of people who are considered missing and unsolved cases that he probably also murdered. Just going on what his confession said, I think that there's a lot in that case that was never really uncovered, and a lot of, definitely for the two people he admitted to murdering, he was only jailed for one, so there's a lot where the families probably won't ever get justice for that, and that's not really fair. And I also think it's just icky.
Yeah, it's sad. The whole thing's sad.
It's really sad, but it's also icky. Making furniture out of people isn't nice. I don't like leather furniture made from not people, from animals. I don't like it. So I like it even less when it's people.
Well, I think that basically wraps up Ed Gein for this week.
Yeah, I think that's quite saying. I haven't yet discovered what I'm going to do next week, but because you mentioned it, I might be tempted to cover the Black Dahlia next week.
It is a fascinating case, and there is a new theory as to who the killer may have been. That's been, I think, what's her face? She's an American journalist. Megan Kelly, I think, did a show where there was a podcast basically that I listened, and the people who were on the podcast came onto her show to discuss the theory that they thought their father was actually the killer.
I've heard of that, so in honour of the new theory, I guess we'll be doing the Black Dahlia next week. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and remember to stay spooky
And stay curious.
We'll see you next week.